So, welcome, everyone. Hello. Hello. Hey. Please don't go. I have to say I apologize. I just broke the rule of not bringing liquids into room 1. But anyway, so I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much, Gregor, for inviting me. It's a great setup, and I'm really impressed. I came here a couple of years ago for 33 degree, and it's impressive how it's grown and joined the DevOps family. So hope you enjoy the conference. So we're going to talk about the silver bullet syndrome today, and I'll give you a bit of a disclaimer. Now, I've been doing presentations for quite a while, and once you start to do presentations, after a few, you have to pick up a couple of tips or guidelines on how presentations should be. First of all, they should be informative, right? Because most of you are here to learn something, and we've got to use your time wisely. It has to be thought-provoking, because a lot of times we don't want to be just like sheep, just following what people say. So they have to be thought-provoking and think differently. Entertaining is a little bit of a plus, because that way people won't fall asleep. Inspirational, well, because it's nice to inspire people. And usually they say no foul language. So I say to hell with all that. I'm not going to be doing any of that today, so my apologies. I'll give you a little bit of background. I was born in Iran, that's in the Middle East still. I moved to Spain, I got into computers and got grumpy. And I work for a company currently called JetBrains. How many of you have heard of JetBrains? You can raise your hands, I don't see anything anyway, so, okay. So anyway, as I always say, if you like my talk, great, buy our tools. If you don't, great, still buy our tools. Don't hold it against the company. Okay, now a little bit of background to this talk. So I've got a friend of mine, I think he might be here actually, Greg. And he put on a conference in Vilnius, in Lithuania, and he said, hey, Hadi, why don't you come to build stuff? And I said, well, that sounds great. I have never been to Lithuania. I'd like to go. I've heard great things about the conference. He says, but. I'm like, but what? There's always a but, right? He says, you have to give a talk on WCF. Now, you're mostly probably a Java crowd, right? Not a .NET crowd. WCF is a technology from Microsoft in which we're actually going to learn a little bit about. But just to give you a little bit of a context what this means, it kind of means like you've been invited to a wedding, and you're all happy and you're all excited, and you open that envelope, and instead of the address, you see something like this. So I was like, thank you, Greg. That's really, really nice of you. And you would say, why me? What did I do wrong? Why would he want me to speak on WCF? So I've made a few mistakes in my life. One of them was writing a book. And on top of that, I wrote the book in Spanish. So I already limited my market. And in Spain, we actually do read books. We just don't have a tendency of buying them. So it limited it a little bit more. And having written this book, well, my name still persists in Google. So if you do WCF Hadi, I show up, unfortunately. I'm trying to get in touch with Google to kind of delete me, but it's not working. So, but getting back to WCF. Now, if you remember, if you're as old as me, you might have remembered a technology called Corba, right? Corba allowed us to do wonderful things in what we could call distributed programming. After Corba, there was this other thing, well, around that time, there was this other thing called Borland Midas. I was a Delphi guy, and I used to work a lot with Borland Midas. And Midas was fantastic. It really was great technology for the time. The only issue was that it would cost like $5,000. And I developed an application in Midas. We deployed it. We paid the license fee to Borland Spain at the time. This was before Borland killed itself by renaming itself to Enterprise, and then resuscitated and jumped off a bridge again by renaming back to Borland. So anyway, and we did this Midas, and we deployed it. We paid the $5,000. 2 weeks later, we found out they're making it free, and I had a hell of a hard time to get my money back from born in Spain, emphasis on Spain. But anyway, it was more or less great technology. Now, if you were in the Microsoft space, at the same time, there was this thing called DCOM, which was also fantastic, because if COM wasn't bad enough, we now could do distributed COM. And then came along this thing called Silver Bullet. And this Silver Bullet was called WCF, and it was brilliant. It had this programming model where you could have like any type of inputs kind of scenario. You had your service model, and then you had these channels. And everything was unified in this brilliant, brilliant setup. And it really was brilliant, because it unified all the communication needs. So whether you were doing SOAP, TCP, UDP, HTTP, it didn't matter. WCF would fix it for you. It complied with the 4 pillars of SOA. Now, you're familiar with SOA, and it had 4 pillars. Now, those 4 pillars, of course, were defined by Don Box, who at the time used to work for Microsoft, which was the same company behind WCF. So it would be quite awkward if it didn't comply with their pillars. Of course, it didn't comply with Thomas Earl's 11 pillars of SOA, but we didn't really care. As long as it complied with the 4, it was fine. And we used to do these talks called Easy as ABC, because you had this thing called an address, and then you had this other thing called a binding and a contract. So your address was where, the binding was how, and the contract. And the best part of this is that you would configure it at runtime, okay? And it had, you used kind of XML. It had a bunch of options, a little bit more options, a little bit more, just to give you a perspective of what that looked like, right? And if you built it with WCF, it would run, of course, if you could actually configure it. And things started to fail. And they said to us, well, your issue is WCF. And you'd say, but you just came on stage and you told me to do this, and I rewrote my entire system using WCF. But those promises were not delivered. And then someone in the .NET space said every class should be a service, and then it just all went downhill from there. We were chasing this silver bullet, and of course, you know that the rest is history, right? Just to put you in perspective, WCF made SOAP look good. Now, recently, if your thing is open source, I'm glad to announce that Microsoft has just made WCF open source, so if that was your barrier to adoption, it no longer has to be. Now, I came from a .NET background, but you guys, you're in Java, you had it too, and you know what they say, if you have a problem, go with Java, and now you have a problem factory. And I was recently in Paris for DevOps France, and I was standing on the boat. They did this fantastic speaker gig where they took us down the river, and I was standing up there taking a picture of the Eiffel Tower. And Antonio Conclaves, one of the organizers of DevOps France, and great guy, he comes up to me and he's like, you look like tourists. I'm like, oh, sorry, well, that is because we are. And he starts to talk to me about this Eiffel Tower, and he says, never has mankind ever created such monstrous large thing that is completely ugly and completely useless as this. I said, of course they have. It's called Java 2 EE. Of course, Antonio is the, yes. Okay, net. But anyway, Java 2E was, okay, it had its issues, but then came along Spring, and Spring said, let's build a better enterprise, and they did. This is FizzBuzz Enterprise Edition, which you can go to GitHub and download. If you've not seen it, it's fantastic. It's like 3,000 files to do FizzBuzz. And it also brought us brilliant things. It brought us the abstract singleton proxy factory bean, which the actual description from the doc says that this is a convenient proxy factory bean superclass for proxy factory beans that create only singletons. Which, you see, there we go back to the Java problem factory, except this time it's singleton. But it really does leave you kind of thinking like, is this the troll version of the documentation, or is this the real one? But don't fear, because there is hope for us. And if you haven't heard, it's called microservices. Okay? Now, microservices is going to help us build distributed applications. If you're not familiar with microservices, it's a bunch of different little services, right, that you just kind of like connect together. So it's kind of like doing a lot of SOAs, except You wouldn't say SOA nowadays, right? Because then, who could potentially do anything now with the word SOA on it? They can't. We'll call it microservices. Difference is you fail small, you fail often, and you fail a lot. So essentially, you're moving from a single ball of mud to orchestrating a lot of shit. That's what's happening. And I'm personally expecting Microsoft soon to come up with BizTalk for microservices. It's like my friend Simon Brown says, he says, if you can't build monoliths properly, microservices aren't going to help you. You're just going to end up with a lot of crap. But it's good, because it allows us to now have conversations in the line of how many lines is a microservice? Or how many classes construct a microservice? And being a tool company, I said tools can help, right? Because if we were talking about every class should be a microservice, I've created a plugin for IntelliJ, which you can select some code and it extracts a microservice for you. And therefore, you no longer have to think about microservices or how many lines of code. Let the tool do it for you. Okay? We've chased this silver bullet too far. Well, let's just stick with microservices for now. Of course, this isn't only an issue in this distributed computing platform. We also have this issue with data persistence. Now, in the early days, we used to write our own DALs. How many of you have written your own DALs, or data access layers, right? And then along came someone and said, ORMs are so much better, because ORMs do all of that work for you. So you no longer have to do anything. And we said, this is really fantastic. So what did we do? We wrote our own ORMs. Because why use something that exists? We'll just write our own, because obviously we can do ours better. Microsoft even did their own. They called it Hibernate Entity Framework. And then someone came along and said, no, you know what? Maybe that was the wrong idea. We should have just used nhibernate or hibernate. And we did it bad. We didn't have to write our own. So we did. But you know how we did it? We created abstractions around it so that we could swap out ORMs, which I never did in my life, but I created those abstractions. It was fantastic. And of course, we lost all of the power of the ORM because we had to deal with our own abstractions. And then someone came along. Have you noticed there's always someone that comes along and says, ORMs are bad? And they said, now you need to do CQRS. You need to separate your reads from your writes. And if you do, oh, you will have fun. What do we do as software developers when something new comes along? We create a framework, of course. I actually went to this framework, and I scrolled down, and I saw the logo of JetBrains there, and I'm like, oh, shit. But apparently, we give them the tools. We don't tell you what to do with them. And then we realized that it wasn't the DAL, it wasn't the ORMs, it wasn't any of that that was the issue. The issue wasn't how we were accessing the data, it was how we were storing the data. Right? SQL Server, Oracle, all of these were problematic. These were just like legacy crap, entity relation, entity relation. It's just nonsense. No SQL. No SQL was the way to do things. And we got a lot of options. We had CouchDB, which was fantastic. You just store your stuff and relax. Cassandra, Hadoop, which I still don't know why it has an elephant as a logo. Don't know if it has any relation whatsoever to PHP. So we said, well, let's, store our data and relax, or maybe not relax so much. So we had a whole bunch of options. And we got this silver bullet of chasing this best platform for storage. Now, some of us realized that the problem wasn't the technology as such in terms of database. It was the platform. Our platform kind of sucked. In my case, it was the .NET platform. It really sucked. And also, my community sucked, too. They were horrible, horrible people. So, I said, .NET sucks. I'm going to Node. But I was not alone. JVM sucks. People are going to Node as well. And normally, when people would do this, and still do, you would get blog posts. I'm leaving Java, or I'm leaving .NET, or I'm leaving what have you. And if you look at the blog post, you would see persistent words, like because too much ceremony, scale, enterprise, you don't help each other. It was always the same kind of pattern. Of course, nowadays, all of that sucks because Go is the place to go, right? And we're kind of like, shit, it was our code all along. Actually, well, no, technically our code did change because we did more or less rewrite it, because that's what we love to do, rewrite things. And actually what changed was the code, so it might have actually been us that was the problem. Another silver bullet. Now, of course, the problem might fall in the paradigm. How many of you have read this book? So, several years ago, when this thing called Solid was in fashion, people would say, have you read this book? And they would say, no. And you're like, and you call yourself a software developer? How dare you? This is the Bible of object orientation. You need this book. Nowadays, if you raise your hands and say you've read this book, they'll look at you and say, ugh, you're one of them, are you? Ugh. Why? Because object-oriented crap is out. Functional programming is in. That's the way to go. I should know. I've got 2 talks on it today. In fact, the other day on Twitter, I saw a tweet that says functional programming is a radical new paradigm, which dates back 45 years. Yes, but to some hipster JavaScript developer, it's a fantastically new paradigm. And if you know functional programming, you know there's only one way to do functional programming, which is what? Haskell, precisely. Anything else just isn't functional programming. Of course, if you ask that in the Microsoft community, everyone will say it's F#. And you know how our application is written in F#, no? Because they'll bloody tell you, and they won't stop telling you, and they'll tweet about it. There's people that go around just tweeting all the applications that are written in F#. So, but don't fear, you don't have to learn Haskell. None of us do, because the future is bright, and it's called JavaScript. And I can't think what I did in my life to end up at 42 having to write JavaScript. It's just something, I must have done some evil to someone at some point. How many of you love JavaScript? Yeah, there's always that 1 or 2 hands that go up. Always. They come into your little community and they start to infiltrate you. And next thing you know, we're all wearing, mustard-colored pants and purple shoelaces, calling ourselves hipsters. But JavaScript is productive. You have to give it that, right? Because we have Node.js. Now, Node.js, if you don't know what Node.js is, imagine all the crap that we wrote on the client. Now we can do that on the server too. And Node.js is absolutely fantastic. And unfortunately, recently what happened is that Node.js split in 2. It forked. Node.js is an open source project that's hosted on GitHub, and someone forked it. Let that sink in for a moment. Someone forked Node, and all hell broke loose. It's open source. It's on GitHub. I pressed fork. No, all hell broke loose. Of course it did. Wired covered it with this picture, and it says future of popular coding tool in doubt after it splits into 2. And then 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, we get tweets saying, if you're stuck on legacy technology like Node.js. Really? But don't worry, it all ended well. New foundation will oversee popular coding tool Node.js. In fact, if you notice, Wired didn't even update their picture. They just said, well, if it works as a fork like this, it'll work as a join like this as well. What the hell? And everyone was happy. Everyone got along, and everyone said, okay, finally, we can now go back to concentrate on rewriting things over and over again. We don't have to worry about Node. And then about 3 weeks ago, Microsoft came along and said, yeah, I'm forking Node. Anyway. Now, if you don't know about Node, Node is fantastic because it's made up of a lot of packages. And there's this website called npmjs.org, and npm is the package manager for Node. But that little red thing there alternates, right? And when you go to it, it says npm is the package manager for Node, for JavaScript. It also says it's the package manager for Bower. Do you know what Bower is? A package manager. Okay, there's been 1,571,655, whatever, a lot of downloads. Now you think about it, those are packages made by people that could consist of 3 lines of code, i.e. a microservice, or a lot of code with no guarantees, no security, no nothing. People can write it, throw it up there and leave, or move to Go because Node.js sucks. No security checks, that's a lot of downloads. And that crap is running our lives right now, which is kind of scary. Good thing about NPM is that it's got discoverable names. So Testacular, Happy, Shit.js, Things.js, Whatever.js. I have not made those names up. In fact, a good friend of mine tweeted some time ago, he said there's a drinking game for web developers. Think of a noun, Google the noun.js. If a library with that name exists, drink. And guess what? You'll get drunk. You will, I promise you. We can try it tonight. But Node and JavaScript, they gave us excellent frameworks. How many of you have heard of Angularjs by Google? Yes. I'll make emphasis there on the by and the Google, which basically means awesome. You know, Google, a large company, is creating this. Therefore, it has a future. And then they released Angular 2.0. Well, they're working on it. And everyone's like, oh, shit, how do I upgrade this? You don't. You just use Angular 2.0. But no buts. Done. OK. I feel your pain. I've gone through it as well. So that's why I've actually abandoned AngularJS, and I'm jumping on the React bandwagon. If you've not heard of React, you can go to the website. It's by Facebook. And they've got a brilliant website where it gives you getting started, download React, and they've got another button which says compatibility certificate, that when you click on it, it says that we guarantee that this will be certified 2.0 compatible. Obviously, it's not. And if you've not heard of React, you should, because now there's React Native, which means that any other form of creating native applications for mobile is now history. This is the only way to go. Okay? Have you learned Android using Java or something else? Forget it. You need React Native. The rest, you don't need. It's the new silver bullet. Now, JavaScript also gave birth to isomorphism. How many of you know what isomorphism is? Yes. As developers, you know, they do say naming is hard. Yes, it is. So server-side rendering isn't smooth. OK? We knew that. It wasn't smooth. So someone said, let's do client-side rendering. And this will work out great. But client-side rendering was hard. So what did we do? We went and created a framework. And then we lost our SEO. And everything started to go slow. So what did we do? We created another framework, and it's called isomorphic frameworks. Isomorphic is those frameworks that allow you to render JavaScript on the client side or on the server side. An example of them are Meteor.js, which I'm sure you've heard of. So every time we have a problem, we'll just add more things to it, so we'll create more problems eventually for ourselves. If you're kind of like me that's moving away from frameworks, I recommend Vapor.js. It's an amazing new framework for JavaScript. Look it up on Google. It's fantastic. All you do is include an empty file, and it works great. And of course, if you don't like that, wait a few days, because I'm sure JavaScript community will come up with something new. They always do. But there is hope. There is hope for those of us that don't really embrace JavaScript, or should I say, embrace it but hate it. The TypeScript language team has visited Google, and they had a great chat. And he's very excited about what's in store for JavaScript. Well, I'm glad he is, and 13 other people, 18. Personally, I say death to JavaScript. Let it become a virtual machine. I don't want to deal with it anymore. But anyway, getting back to React and talking about naming things back, we are also beyond object orientation. We're beyond functional now. We are on what's something new called reactive. This is where everything is going. And remember I said how the first thing we do as software developers when something new comes up is create a framework? I lied. First thing we do is write a manifesto. And in that manifesto, we make bold claims that all applications need to be scalable, responsive, elastic, everything you can think of. And we all need this. So now, in effect, it actually makes sense for me to say something. I'm developing a functionally reactive RESTful microservice. And I'm writing it in RX CoffeeScript because there is also a flavor of that. I'm building it with Grunt, or what, no, actually Gulp, and shipping it in Docker. And that makes complete sense. Because containers are the thing now. It's all about Docker. You know that unproven technology that's just come out and everyone's shipping everything on it? That's the way to go. And my theory here is that, because as software developers, we said that because the only way to guarantee that software is working is that it works on my machine, basically. Screw it, let's just ship my machine. And now we've got a whole bunch of little containers containing little microservices all deployed out in the wild. But we'll call it DevOps. Anyway, but it's actually a silver bullet. But building software is hard. And this is literally. Now, how many of you are old enough to remember Make? Yes. First there was Make, and it worked. It still does. And then there came Ant, or in the .NET world, came Nant. Then came Maven, and we all just died a little bit. Then someone said Ruby. Someone has said, oh, expressive DSLs. And someone said, oh, let's make a build tool with DSLs. And thus was born Rake. And we provide support for it. Oh dear. And the JVM said, oh, let's go with Gradle. That's fantastic. And .NET got Pisake, or Sake, or Cake, and Fake. Literally, they do. The most successful now is Fake. I'm serious. And JavaScript got, well, Jake. But they also got Grunt. Why? Because JavaScript, right? Because JavaScript isn't horribly bad enough that, well, let's go and build our build in it as well. But someone came along and said, ugh, that's really ugly. So Grunt goes to Gulp. So now you should write Gulp. That's how you make your build tools. So now every time you want to build something, you pull 16,000 dependencies, which are your own files, and then 200,000 dependencies that Gulp requires for you to build your 3 lines of code. In essence, every time you pull down the entire internet. Because, well, having said that, it's okay for you guys because you've had experience with Maven. So, But if building software is hard, you know what's harder? Building scalable software. I don't know if you've seen this video about Node.js scales. If you haven't, please go see it. It's hilarious. Yes, but we need scale. I call it the Silicon Valley syndrome, right? Because we need scale. They tell us we need scale. Are you building an application? Yes, it needs to scale. But it's for the shop down the corner. Yeah, but imagine if that shop down the corner now franchises out, and then they'll have 100 shops. Okay, you need to scale. But there'll only be like 200 people buying. It's very neat. Doesn't matter, you need to scale. It's called the Silicon Valley syndrome, right? And they're backed by, large providers, you might know it as the cloud. Amazon, Microsoft, all of them, everyone's telling us we need to scale. It doesn't matter if we're writing 5 lines of code or 100 or, dedicating it to 5 people or 2 billion, we all need scale. And fortunately, the cloud is there for us to scale, which is fantastic. You kind of think, really? No, actually, if you think about it, we are geniuses. Really, we are geniuses. As an industry, we are, because we've created a self-sustaining industry. We have. And you say, why? Well, think about it. A new technology comes along, we recommend it, and we sell it. We provide training. If we're good, we normally accompany it by a 2-day certified course. And then we implement it, we put it in production, something goes wrong, but by that time, some new technology has come along for us to recommend and train. And of course, it wouldn't be fair of me, it would be quite hypocritical of me to stand on stage and say this, but we have a part in this tool because we provide the tooling for you. Okay? It's brilliant though, self-sustaining. We will never be out of business. And if something actually does work, we'll just pretend it doesn't. And now, in fact, you don't even need to go through that step. You first create a new framework, then you create a conference around the framework, and then you go back to 10. In fact, sometimes for me to figure out what a framework is, I look it up by the conference tag, right? Oh yeah, there's an isomorphic conference going on somewhere in some hipster locale somewhere in the world. And if that wasn't enough, new doors have opened for us, right? Because now we also have something else. It's called the Internet of Things. So this is a picture of me, a mock-up of taking my Raspberry Pi and sticking down my toilet. Well, not the Raspberry Pi, the cable. And I tweeted, and I said, oh, now I can actually tweet and flush the toilet, so I don't actually have to turn around. I can just tweet. And the responses were in line of, how do you make sure the cable doesn't get wet? I haven't figured that one out yet. I will, though. And I'll probably then get some VC to back me by $10 million. And says a flush tweet. So, and of course, in addition to the Internet of Things, we also have DevOps. And now we've got certification around DevOps and courses around DevOps, because DevOps is apparently empathy is something that you can train and certify on. So, of course, you're going to say, stop, this is enough. Like, shut up. What exactly is my point to all this? There isn't. I told you that this is not going to be an informative talk. Right? Now I've just got 30 minutes to tell jokes. No, I'm joking. There is no silver bullet. There actually isn't. And we all know there isn't. We've been in this industry long enough to know that there's no silver bullet. So why exactly are we constantly jumping onto new technologies? Why? I mean, what makes us continuously want to try out new technologies? So that kind of goes back to asking another question, which is, why are we developing software? Now, I'll ask a question. I won't see any hands, so I'll assume it's the answer I want it to be. How many of you are in software development because of money? Right. Now, those same people that put up their hands, put down your hands if you're doing SharePoint development. Okay. So, SharePoint, the only reason you get into it is because of the money, literally. So, most of us are here because we either have a fascination with technology, or we like to automate things, or actually, maybe even think about it, we like to help people. We like to make people's lives easier. I know personally, and I know many of you, got into this business because you said, how can I actually make someone's job easier when I see them doing repetitive, bureaucratic tasks over and over again? What could I do to potentially make that fun and easy for them? Of course, now we're maybe going a little bit too far, because now we're getting self-driving cars and a whole bunch of other things. But the main goal was to try and help people and enjoy it at the same time. Automate stuff, because we all love to automate stuff. We didn't get into software saying that software is the goal. That wasn't the reason. Now, a lot of the online press will make us believe that software is the goal, with articles such as "the business of software" or "software is the business." Software is the business if you're selling software, or you're creating tools around software, and you need software in order to have the business. But the goal isn't software. The goal was helping people, automating things, making tasks easier, and I will keep insisting on helping people. The goals weren't upgrades. It wasn't all about, oh, let's just upgrade, upgrade, upgrade. Because if you think about it, right now in our industry, there is such a high technology churn. It's become impossible to actually keep up with what's going on. Especially, and I blame partially, okay, no, scratch that. I totally blame this on the JavaScript community. Okay, not totally, but quite a bit. There's so much things coming out every single day. Every single day, a new framework, a new library, a new pattern, and everything's coming out every day. And we can't always be on this latest and greatest thing. It's just not viable, right? It's kind of like saying, oh, I'm going to buy a laptop, but I'm not going to buy it today because tomorrow a better one might come out. We soon realize that that's not going to happen. In 6 months from now, your laptop is obsolete and there's a better one for a cheaper price. Unless it's Apple, then it's more expensive and gives you less ports. But that's a different matter. But you do get a gold cover. So, you say, but okay, that's fine, but we're innovating. We're finding new ways to improve. And it's true. And you know what? I stand behind that. I say innovation and improvements are good. And I stand behind that with this slide, which is in Comic Sans, in bold, in red. And I'm not being sarcastic. Because I'm sure that someone will say, oh my God, I just saw a slide in Comic Sans. Good. And they'll take a picture of that, and that's the message. Innovation and improvements are good. But what we have to ask is, what exactly are we improving? And when we ask that question, what we should ask is, how does it bring business value? And please, when I say business value, that doesn't mean you're doing behavior-driven development. Okay? How does it bring value? And this is a question that I personally ask myself every day, and I think that my teammates should ask, and I think everyone at the company should ask, how is it that what we're doing bring value for us as individuals, for our team, for our company, and most of all for society? How does it bring value? But let's focus around business in our case. How does it bring value to business? How do we make choices when we're adopting new technology? I mean, do we use reasoning like, Walmart has moved to Node.js? Some tech lead somewhere any day. Anyone. Yeah, I've literally heard this. Why did you move to Node.js? Well, Walmart did. And, well, they're big. And, well, if they fail, they're big. Oh, I see. Yes. Or were you influenced by thought leaders or industry? This is the way to go. You have to use this technology, or you have to use this pattern, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. We all say it. Even me, I've said it in the past. I've told people to go to WCF. Okay, I'm paying the consequences now. But it doesn't mean that we always have to do it because of these reasons. Because do we actually have the same needs as Walmart or Google or Netflix? Netflix has moved to microservices, and they've got 600,000 microservices in production, and they're orchestrating it with I don't know what, and Kibana is monitoring it, and with Kafka, and pushing the things out to I don't know what. It's like become a keyword roulette. Just combine 50 different things and just say them. But when they do this, and when we use these as examples, do we say that if the same conditions apply for us as for them? Because you see, there's a thing called context, and context is a really, really important word, right? And a certain technology applies in a certain context. I might not have the same needs as Walmart or as Netflix. I'm not serving billions of hours of streaming a day to gazillions of people all over the world, making everyone zombies. I'm not doing that. So why do I need these things? Oh, well, it's really nice though, and it looks really cool. And when we go to presentations and we read articles and all of this, we see all those, because all of the presentations have to be inspirational. If they're not inspirational, we're writing microservices and we use this and that. I don't want to do that. But much like best practices needs context, these things also need context. You don't just switch to a technology or adopt a technology because someone else has, or because it looks fantastically cool. So how do we actually make those technological choices? And is it just based on this, or do we take into account things like technology stability? How long has it been around? How long is it going to be around? If it's a Node.js package, it'll probably be 5 days. Is it proven technology? Does it work? I mean, like for example, recently with Docker, this urge of Docker, what we're doing is basically taking containers that someone else has configured with God knows what and using them as the base for our stuff. Are we looking at what exactly they've configured and what they're doing when we just pull things from a registry? What's the learning curve? Is it worth it? Is it worth for me to learn this? Does it pay off? Does it make any benefits? And what's the market share? If I learn it and I leave, what happens next? Do we create a little cardboard box or a little what have you and start to draw a line and say, you know what? How much would it cost me if I were to rewrite this system versus extend it? Well, if I rewrite it, I have to add unit tests. So that'll be about 2 months, and it'll cost me that because I didn't write unit tests to begin with. And then I have to do this, and then maybe I have to buy that library, blah, blah, blah. But if I use new technology, I'll do this. Or if I extend it, I'll do that. Do we take these things into account? Do we actually calculate the costs? And what's more important, Because we're measuring, do we look back and see whether that measurement actually was right? Do we get our return on investment? Yes, we moved to Node.js and it saved us 3 hours a day. And here it's documented on an Excel sheet. Wow, that's cool. I don't see us really doing that. I do see us saying we moved to Node.js and it was really cool because now it's Node, it's great. In fact, a lot of people move to Node.js because of performance, but you all know that JVM is probably the best performant virtual machine there is out there. And if not, look at the tests. There is independent tests going on week after week proving this. And yet everyone says, oh no, I moved to Node.js because scale. Because the thing is that if things go back, guess what? We're not Google or Facebook. We don't have money to burn. Who's going to pay the cost? The company? Our employer? And not only the cost of having to rewrite or use some other technology, but the cost of what it costs to actually do that in the first place. Does it impact our pay? Does our boss come and say to us, well, you chose Node.js? Yes, it was wrong. Okay. Can you choose something else? Okay. Or does he come and say, oh, you know what? Or does she come and say, here's a pay cut. You chose Node.js. It sucked. Will that make you think better next time? Evaluate more things next time? If money were to come out of our own pockets? And often I found that there is a financial impedance mismatch between us as developers and us as a business. We really sometimes don't take into account the real value that business needs, the real value that something adds when we make these choices. I always say, it's really great if we all, at some point in our life, set up a business just so that we have to pay the bills, just so that we start to value other perspectives when we're making choices. Because if it doesn't bring value, why are we doing it? And are we confusing our values with that of a desire to learn? Is it about us learning? So are we actually chasing the new shiny as opposed to the silver bullet, as opposed to the promised solution? Are we just saying, you know what, if I do this, it will be really cool. And not only do I get to use new technology, but I get to learn it. And it will be really, really awesome. It'll be awesome for everyone. And we let that maybe fog our decisions and our thinking about why we're taking some steps. So are our decisions CV-driven? I've seen things like, haha, you're stagnated. Poor thing, still having to use Delphi. Now, I've got a lot of friends using Delphi. And in fact, they're charging a hell of a lot of money because guess what? Not everyone's using Delphi right now. You know what else is using Delphi? The Rosetta Comet that landed recently. That's software partially written in Delphi. And guess what? It works. I recently saw a tweet about JSON-X is an IBM standard format to represent JSON as XML. Now you look at that and you think, well, if I were to choose a company of where that would come from, probably I would have won. But why are they doing that? Now we can laugh at that, but maybe they're actually doing that because by doing so they can interoperate with what they already have and it might work out cheaper for them. And they don't need to rewrite the whole system to use JSON, for instance. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe this was the cheaper solution. And guess what? It might work. But you say, no, it's not really about my CV. It's also about attracting new talents, right? It's about, if we're a company that, I'm a company that's doing comm. Who's going to want to come and work for me? The problem is that we ourselves are at part of the issue. We are promoting this practice ourselves, right? When we create our CVs or when we look at our CVs, we look for things like this. Angularjs, Durandal. Well, Durandal doesn't exist anymore. It's called Aurelia. React, jQuery. I know JavaScript, Java, C#, VB, SQL Server, MongoDB. That's what we look at in a CV. That's how we classify people. As opposed to looking at CVs and saying, oh, look, I have a brain. I know how to analyze and reason. I understand the software engineering principles. And what's my experience? Oh, well, I've worked saving millions by writing software that deals with bureaucratic processes. I've helped work on systems that saved lives, and I've worked with teams and lasting relationships. This is what we should be looking at, because we're not monkeys. We can all learn. A new framework comes along, we'll learn it, and we'll unlearn it. But if we're promoting this by the way we are creating our own CVs and by the way we're hiring, we're the ones that are causing the effect of saying it's the only way to attract talent. Software isn't the goal. Other things are the goal. And we shouldn't value people based on their technology stack. I mean, would you like it if people valued you just for the frameworks you knew in JavaScript? No, but guess what? That's exactly what's happening now. That's exactly what's happening now. Now, of course, we're at a conference, and this would be a really bad keynote if I just demotivated everyone. I'm not saying that innovation is bad. I'm not saying learning is bad. I'm not saying picking up new technologies, using all of those is bad. It's good. You should go learn. It's your job. You actually need to be learning this. You need to be on the cutting edge. You need to evaluate things. And you need to evaluate them and understand how, where do I use it? Not just blindly use it because someone says so. And you really need to ask yourself, why do I want to use this? What business value does it bring? Does it improve anything, or is it just my urge to learn something new? And if it is, hey, maybe I do that on my own time. I have nothing to lose. And if I have a family, well, maybe I'll combine it. Life is about sacrifices at the end of the day. Right? This isn't about not using new technologies or not wanting to learn or not wanting to innovate. This is about making the choices based on the right things and focusing on the right things. That's what this is about. Thank you. I guess you can now just all get up and leave.